A beginner's guide to power structures in Femdom. You're listening to the Mistress Code. I'm RacyWilde. Firstly, it is important to understand why it is so difficult to find clear, direct information in BDSM spaces. BDSM culture tends to resist standardization because it is highly individualistic. Ironically, this aversion is exactly what creates much of the confusion, contention, and unsafety in the scene, especially for beginners who often dive in too deep before they truly understand what they are getting into. My intention here is not to prescribe a universal approach, but to give you a basic foundation to get you on the right footing so you can make informed and safer choices for yourself. I will be generalizing and compartmentalizing for educational clarity only, with the sole purpose of making complex structures easier to recognize, learn, and understand. I will only be discussing power structures as they relate to Femdom. Broadly speaking, there are two power exchange models in Femdom that are fundamentally opposed to each other: egalitarian and hierarchical. These form the structural base upon which dominers build their individual styles of practice. Which model a dominer chooses depends on the type of relational connection she wants and the outcomes she seeks with her submissives. Some dominers practice strictly egalitarian dynamics, some strictly hierarchical, and others may move between the two, either blending them or using one as a stepping stone into the other. For clarity, however, I will treat them here as separate and complete structures. Because these two models are rarely studied or examined as structures, as BDSM culture often favors just do, don't think, there is very little accessible information explaining how each model actually functions and how power is positioned within the dynamic. What follows is based on my lived experience and practice of both models, offered to help fill that gap. The Negotiated Egalitarian Model, or NE. Most people are introduced to Femdom through what could be called the Negotiated Egalitarian Model. In my personal philosophy, I call this relative Femdom. This model creates a tightly controlled container in which a conditional power imbalance can be practiced. Structurally, both participants retain power over themselves. To achieve this, the model operates through two distinct layers of power. The outer layer functions as a control center, where the structure of the dynamic is created and managed. Here, both partners have equal say, equal veto, and equal influence. The inner layer is the dynamic container, where the dominant and submissive enact what was pre-negotiated in the outer layer. The construction of the dynamic begins in the outer layer through extensive negotiation. The dominant and submissive come to the table as equals and decide together what will be included in the dynamic container. Desires, activities, sex, emotional tone, limits, rules, and expectations. Consent in NE is established at this stage and then actively maintained through communication, check-ins, and the ongoing ability for either person to stop, change, or renegotiate the dynamic. Power imbalance exists only inside the dynamic container, the inner layer, not at the structural level, where power remains equal. The dominant's domination and the submissive submission are governed by their prior mutual agreement. This means that while the experience of power may feel unequal within the dynamic container, the dominant's authority is conditional. She is authorized to lead only within the boundaries that were mutually agreed upon, and only for as long as the submissive continues to approve of how that authority is exercised. If the submissive becomes uncomfortable or dissatisfied, the dominant's authority can be stopped, altered, or renegotiated. Even while acting subordinate within the dynamic, the submissive never becomes structurally subordinate. He retains power over the outcomes, pacing, inclusion of desires, and the continuation of the dynamic itself. As a result, the structure of NE is co-authored, and the power imbalance inside the dynamic remains conditional. The degree and style of dominance and submission are negotiated and adjustable. The fulfillment of both partners' desires becomes an agreed obligation. The dominant follows the mutual written script. The submissive follows as long as she remains within it. If she deviates without prior agreement, consent is automatically withdrawn. At this point, many people ask, if both partners retain equal decision-making power over the structure, is this real power exchange? The answer is no, not in a structural sense. In NE, power exchange is role-based enactment. The appearance of power imbalance exists only inside the pre-negotiated container. Because the dominant does not independently author her own authority, she is not governing power, she is performing it. The dynamic can still be intense, erotic, emotionally meaningful, and psychologically deep, but the power imbalance is scripted. Authority is on loan, not transferred. This does not make NE wrong. It just makes it egalitarian. Just a side note here. When power is an identity or orientation, negotiation can become more complex. Many people struggle with the idea that a power imbalance can exist before explicit negotiation, and this can be an ethical issue if it is not properly understood and managed. This is because many dominants and submissives do not experience power as roles, but as orientations. Just as someone does not negotiate the existence of being gay before entering a same-sex relationship, orientational DS does not require negotiating the existence of power itself, only consent to enact it. Negotiated egalitarianism is extremely popular because it is designed for safety. No one fully yields power. No one becomes structurally vulnerable. Consent is managed outside the dynamic, ensuring that role play does not override agency. This aligns closely with modern egalitarian relationship ethics and therapeutic culture, making it accessible and familiar, especially for beginners. I strongly recommend NE for people new to the scene, for early stages of trust building, and for submissives who need their desires centered in order to feel safe submitting. Always do this one first. Now let's move on to the non-negotiated ethical hierarchy model, NNEH. Now, many people immediately react to this name. That reaction is understandable. The language can trigger fear. I call my own practice absolute Femdom, which tends to provoke even stronger responses. Let's clarify what NNEH actually means. Non-negotiated means a dominant's power is not governed by the submissive through negotiation. The dominant retains jurisdiction over her own authority. She is the sole author of the structure, pace, and direction of the dynamic. The submissive may voice desires, but indulgence is entirely at the dominant's discretion. Submission is to her structure, not a jointly created container. Ethical is the word many people struggle with. Hierarchy is often conflated with patriarchy and colonial abuse. In vanilla relationships, feminist egalitarianism was a necessary corrective and a vital one for women's safety and autonomy. However, BDSM is not vanilla life. BDSM explicitly explores taboo dynamics inside consensual containers. Acts that could be unethical outside the container, objectifying, giving pain, humiliating, are permitted because of informed consent and established safety frameworks. Ethics in BDSM are defined by consent, responsibility, care, and competence, not by the absence of hierarchy. In my own Femdom philosophy, ethical hierarchy includes explicit responsibility and duty of care from the authority holder. Hierarchy simply means asymmetrical power. It is already present in many ethical everyday structures: teacher-student, mentor-mentee, doctor-patient, parent-child. These structures are ethical because authority, responsibility, and care are aligned. NNEH operates as the opposite of NE, where NE creates a control container inside an egalitarian framework. NNEH is a hierarchical framework from the onset. There is one governing structure, hers. In NNEH, power is imbalanced at the structural level and therefore governs the dynamic itself. The dominant is the sole author of the structure, the dynamic, and the authority that governs it. Power is neither shared nor co-managed. Decision-making, pacing, and outcomes are authored by the dominant alone. As a result, the submissive does not retain power over outcomes, does not co-author the dominor's domination or the dynamic, and does not obligate the dominer to fulfill his desires. Because the dominer authors authority independently, she is not performing dominance, she is governing it. Her authority is not conditional, reversible, or on loan. It is consensually exercised through the transfer of the submissive's decision-making power to her. The submissive submits to her existing structure. This is what creates real power exchange. A metaphor to clarify: in NE, you build the house together. In NNEH, the house already belongs to her, and he has been invited inside. Consent in NNEH is still active, ethical, and ongoing, but it operates differently than in NE. In NE, consent is used as co-managed power, moment by moment. It exists outside the dynamic as a governing system that regulates authority. In NNEH, consent is structural. The submissive consents to entering the dominor's authority, knowing that he does not co-author it. Thus, consent does not manage the structure. It activates it. This does not mean the submissive's consent disappears. Communication, check-ins, slowing down, and stopping remain essential safety practices in NNEH. Ethics, responsibility, and care are not removed by real power exchange. They are required by it. What changes is that consent is no longer used to steer or negotiate authority. It is embedded in the structural framework itself. The submissive makes an informed decision to submit to the dominor's authority. As trust deepens, consent deepens alongside it. Submission increases in proportion to trust, not negotiation. Because authority is transferred rather than negotiated, NNEH requires a much higher level of trust and a much higher level of competence from the dominer. This structure is not suitable for beginners or strangers and should never be entered into casually. In my opinion, NNEH should only be approached after a successful period of NE. Beforehand, trust must already exist, skill must already be demonstrated, and consistency must already be proven. In my own practice, I do not enter NNEH with any submissive without a substantial trial period. 6 months is my minimum. I need to trust my submissive just as deeply as he needs to trust me. And trust is not created through desire or fantasy. It is built through time, behavior, and reliability. Understanding which structure you are entering and which one you are not is essential for ethical practice, safety, and consent. Now let's address the taboo here. Discomfort is common when people first encounter NNEH. That discomfort is often mistaken for danger. In a culture that treats equality as the only moral option, real asymmetry feels confronting. NE feels safe because no one risks loss of power. NNEH feels confronting because someone does. But let me tell you this. Ethical harm does not come from asymmetry itself. It comes from ambiguity, dishonesty, and lack of skill. Clear authority paired with aligned responsibility can be profoundly ethical. Problems arise when one model is treated as universal and the other is judged without being understood. NE and NNEH exist to serve different desires and different orientations towards power. The bottom line is, if you want a dynamic in which people retain power and authority is conditional, NE is for you. If you're looking for real power exchange, where decision-making authority is surrendered to the dominant, NNEH is what you want. For beginners, clarity here will save you years of confusion.